In the year 1391, during the reign of King Gong of the Goryeo dynasty, a merchant named Gong and 7 foreigners arrived in Korea with a letter and gifts from the King of Ayutthaya in modern-day Thailand. King Gong was intrigued and accepted the offerings, but he noticed something odd about the letter. It was neither sealed nor signed, and was only affixed with a small round seal. But, as the Goryeo court could not authenticate the document, the king skeptically welcomed Gong and his men into the court. To avoid the potential for a diplomatic approach if the men were proven later to be a real delegation from the king of Ayutthaya, the Goryeo court decided it was best to offer the guests hospitality. Whether or not it was a real envoy sent by the king of Ayutthaya, this event marks the earliest recorded contact between Thailand and Korea, which occurred during the last year of the Goryeo dynasty and would continue into the early years of the Joseon in the 14th century. Hello and welcome. Today we'll be exploring the fascinating history of the early contact between these distant nations and delve into the aborted attempt by Ayutthaya to lend its support to Joseon during the Japanese invasion of Korea in 1592, about 200 years later. These two periods represent an interesting chapter in the history of these distant kingdoms, showcasing the dynamic changes taking place across Southeast and East Asia from the 14th century. Before we begin, I would like to express my gratitude for visiting my channel for your historical interests. If you enjoy this type of video, please consider subscribing, but without further ado, please enjoy the video. In the 14th century, Ayutthaya was not entirely unknown to Korea. A report in the Goryeosa, or the Chronicle of the Goryeo dynasty, from 1357, reveals that Korea was aware of the existence of several kingdoms in Southeast Asia, including Jampa, Vietnam, Srivijaya, Cambodia, and Thailand. They knew these kingdoms often sent tribute to the Chinese court. At the time, Ayutthaya was known as Hung-guk in Korean. On the other side, it is likely that Ayutthaya learned of the existence of the Korean peninsula through trade with Chinese or Japanese junks, or possibly the Chinese court. The 14th century was a significant period of change and development in various countries in Southeast and East Asia. The Majapahit and Java had developed a maritime empire, controlled large parts of maritime Southeast Asia, and actively engaged in foreign trade. In China, the Ming dynasty had replaced the yuan and later began a closed-door policy of trade, limiting commerce to tributary states and restricting most Chinese maritime activities. The Ashikaga shogunate in Japan, founded in 1336, witnessed a period of tremendous economic growth, which encouraged greater foreign trade in the country than in previous centuries. In this context, the Kingdom of Ayutthaya, founded in the mid-14th century, emerged and began to place particular emphasis on foreign trade, especially with East Asia. This emphasis on trade provides a broader understanding of why the Thai merchant Gong chose to visit the court of Goryeo. So who exactly was this person, and was he really an emissary of the court of Ayutthaya? It seems unlikely that Gong was dispatched by the king of Ayutthaya to Korea, as the letter he brought was neither signed nor sealed, as it was standard practice for such letters to be signed by the Ayutthaya king or an important minister. While little is known about Gong's identity, he was likely a merchant employed by the king of Ayutthaya, as the title Nai was given to low-level civil officials in Ayutthaya, suggesting he was a captain of trading ships belonging to the king. It is worth noting that the king of Ayutthaya restricted most foreign trade to ships owned by the royal court, so based on Gong's title, he likely sailed to Korea aboard a royal ship. However, Gong did tell the king of Goryeo that he was appointed by the king of Ayutthaya to supervise a ship and sail to Korea as an official delegation, which doesn't seem to be true. Historical records from Ayutthaya contain no information about dispatching an envoy to Korea, but it is possible that records were lost when the Hung-guk dynasty invaded and destroyed much of Ayutthaya in 1767. But it is more likely that Gong arrived to Korea on his own initiative. During this time period, Ayutthaya actively engaged in trade within the South China Sea and maintained robust commercial relations with China. Gong reported to the Goryeo court that he had arrived in Japan in 1390, where he likely heard about the potential commercial opportunities with Korea. Japanese pirates were prevalent in the waters around the East China Sea and frequently raided the southern coast of Korea. Gong was a seasoned trader who had traveled extensively throughout South and East China Seas. He likely learned about Korea from the Japanese and decided to fabricate a letter to gain access to Korea. Gong's primary objective seems to be to explore a new market for the king of Ayutthaya and likely enhance his profits. However, after Gong's departure from Korea, there was no further contact between Ayutthaya and the Goryeo dynasty. The lack of contact was due in part to the Goryeo court's skepticism about the delegation, but more importantly, it was because the Goryeo faced internal issues. When Gong arrived to Korea, it was under the dominance of Lee Seung-gyo, a military officer under the Goryeo, who would establish the Joseon dynasty a year later. Consequently, the Goryeo was not in a position to establish relations with Ayutthaya at the time. The Joseon dynasty in Korea would receive a second delegation from Ayutthaya later. In 1394, Naizang Sidao, a Chinese trader from Ayutthaya, arrived in Korea bearing gifts for King Taejo. This included 600 kilograms of sapan wood and aloes wood, as well as 2 Malay slaves. Unlike Gong, there was no mention of a letter from the king of Ayutthaya. It seems that Zhang Shidao arrived to assess the possibilities for trade with Korea. King Taejo was evidently pleased with the gifts and became interested in establishing formal relations with Ayutthaya. A Joseon envoy named Bai Hyu agreed to accompany Zhang Shidao back to Ayutthaya, but their ship was attacked by Japanese pirates while in Japan. The gifts that King Taejo had sent to the king of Ayutthaya were stolen. Zhang Shidao and Bai Hyu returned to Korea to report back to King Taejo. The first delegation failed, but Zhang Shidao reportedly returned with a gift of a Japanese sword, a suit of armor, and 2 African slaves for King Taejo. Zhang Shidao remained at the Joseon court for a year and was eventually appointed as a high official within the Yabinsa, the board for the reception of state guests. This indicated that King Taejo was taking seriously the potential of creating close ties with Ayutthaya. In 1396, the Joseon sent another delegation to Ayutthaya, accompanied by an official interpreter named Lee Jae-yong, who apparently spoke Chinese. Bai Hyu and Lee Jae-yong were the first documented Koreans to have visited Ayutthaya, but no records of their visit survive to indicate their stay there. However, reportedly on their return to Korea, the Ayutthayan ship was attacked by Japanese pirates, killing everyone besides Lee Jae-yong, who was imprisoned in Japan but later returned to Korea to report on the matter. Unfortunately, relations between Korea and Ayutthaya did not come due to the dangers posed by pirates. By 1398, Ayutthaya's merchants may have felt that the profits from trading with Korea would not counterbalance the risk of sailing such a long distance. It would take another 200 years before talks about diplomatic relations between Korea and Ayutthaya would once again emerge. In 1590, Hideyoshi Toyotomi had achieved the second great unification of Japan and had already begun to set his sights on expanding his power across the Sea of Japan. One of his immediate objectives was to invade the Korean peninsula. In addition to pressuring the Ryukyu Islands and several other nations to pay tribute to Japan, Hideyoshi's ultimate ambition was to build an Asian empire comprising not only Japan, but also China, Korea, the Ryukyu Islands, the Philippines, and parts of India. The first step towards achieving this goal was the invasion of Korea, which took place between 1592 and 1598. While there is no documentary evidence to suggest that Ayutthaya, the Spanish in the Philippines, and the Portuguese in India received threatening letters from Hideyoshi, Japanese ambitions were a persistent concern for both Joseon and Ming China. The Ming Emperor became increasingly worried that Hideyoshi intended to invade Joseon and use the Korean peninsula as a staging ground for an invasion of China. When Japan invaded and quickly occupied the Joseon capital of Hanyang, China mobilized an army to march towards the peninsula. The Joseon survived largely due to military aid provided by China in the early stages of the war, which China did not provide in response to Joseon's request, but rather to secure itself against Japan. There are several intriguing aspects of the war that involved Ayutthaya. One such instance is when the king of Ayutthaya proposed sending Thai soldiers to support Joseon against Japan. This event occurred in 1592, and during that year, a delegation from Ayutthaya paid tribute to the Ming Emperor while discussing their proposal to mobilize Ayutthaya's forces to invade Japan. Interestingly, historical records from the Mingshi indicate that China had also considered enlisting the Philippines and Ryukyu Islands as a combined force against the Japanese. However, despite Ayutthaya's willingness to support China and Joseon, the kingdom was not in a strong position to do so in the late 16th century. In 1569, the Toungoo dynasty invaded and destroyed much of Ayutthaya when the kingdom became a vassal of the Toungoo for more than 10 years. It was only until the mid-1580s when a revolt restored Ayutthaya's independence, but the Burmese continued to invade to subdue the Thai kingdom. By 1592, Ayutthaya was threatened by the Toungoo and had been grappling with raids from Cambodia on its eastern border. The threat of the Burmese persisted until 1593, when Ayutthaya ultimately defeated the Toungoo in Nong Sarai. The reason why Ayutthaya proposed mobilizing an army against the Japanese can be attributed to the kingdom's significant role in intra-Asian commerce. Trade with China had always been a vital source of revenue for Ayutthaya, which became more important after the Toungoo's invasion and wars with Cambodia. Given Ayutthaya's commercial interests in China, the kingdom's proposal to support Joseon was likely an attempt to safeguard the South China Sea. Moreover, offering military support to China and Joseon presented an opportunity to enhance Ayutthaya's trade relationship with both nations. Despite the initial agreement of the Ming court, the emperor ultimately rejected the kingdom's support after being convinced by the viceroy in Guangdong. Some military advisors were skeptical of Ayutthaya's true intentions in lending aid. Thus, instead of supporting Joseon against Japan, the Ming emperor requested that Ayutthaya invade the Toungoo due to their potential threat near China's border. In the end, Ayutthaya never mobilized to invade Japan, and their proposal to support Joseon remained unrealized. While there is no documented evidence of Ayutthaya and Joseon engaging in diplomatic correspondence during the 16th century, the Korean chronicles do indicate that Joseon was aware of Ayutthaya's proposal and was receptive to the idea of a potential alliance. However, direct contact between the two states would not be established until the 20th century, when Thailand provided military support to South Korea during the Korean War in 1950. In conclusion, the lack of direct communication between Ayutthaya and Korea during the 16th century can be attributed to the significant physical distance between the two states. As a result, diplomatic relations were never fully developed. Nevertheless, this period of early contact between East and Southeast Asia represents an intriguing phase of the dynamic transformations occurring in the two regions from the 14th century, offering insight into the complex history of intra-Asian interactions. Thank you again for taking the time to watch. Please consider hitting the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your support means a lot, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching.